Okay, thank you all for gathering for our side event, for the Pantarey Foundation side event today at the first day of the conference of OSCE about tolerance and non-discrimination. Our event is run Pantarey Foundation, but also the party of our event is the National Institute of Strategic Studies Foundation from Poland, and also Ad Actum company from United States. We're going to speak about today different type of discrimination that we maybe not so aware, or not we don't talk so much on this kind of conference, financial discrimination. So we're going to speak about the system, that is financial system that we are living in, and we're going to have also some ideas and technical solutions for adjusting the system or changing the system for securing more basic freedom rights, human rights, the whole world. So, not further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers today. We're going to start with the colleagues from the National Institute of Strategic Studies, Jacek Zadrąg, and the other one is Michał Mczernecki. Yes, and we're going to have also they are in the board of the institute. And we have also the CEO of and the president of the institute, Mr. Wojciech Dobrzyński, who's gonna comment it later. From Ad Actum, straight from United States, Cameron McGregor, that came with some problems because he couldn't have a passport, but in the next day, I think, Cameron, you received a new passport. So
5 hours.
Five hours before flight. So. It's really nice that you are not on the Zoom.
Yes.
Maybe we can have also a connection with Elizabeth Sabatich-Wolf, an Austrian United States citizen, the national, that we're going to have some comments from their side. So the structure of our event is to have a presentation from the Institute, and then we're going to have a comment and discussion led by Cameron, and hopefully you're going to have some questions. So we're going to have some discussion. So 30 minutes of presentation and 20 minutes of discussion. So please, Jacek, could you start your presentation?
I'll just myself share my screen.
Okay, you must use headsets to make you better because the system is use headset too.
That's the one, I believe. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Like Michał said, I'm Jacek. I represent National Institute for Strategic Studies, and I'm together with my colleague Michał, we are members of the supervisory boards. And one of the goals of our organization is dissemination of truth about money and economics. We promote new financial architecture of the world based on sovereign non-debt social currencies, which we'll explain later. And today we would like to turn your attention to what's happening in the world because of debt. Okay. French economist from 19th century, Frédéric Bastiat, rightly noticed when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men living together in a society, they create for themselves, in the course of time, a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. This observation is very accurate and describes what is really happening in the world today. Global organizations dictate the law. We are witnessing attacks on different forms of freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of decisions about your own body, freedom of independent thinking. We are constantly losing our freedom and slowly becoming, if not already became, slaves of this oppressive financial system. Montesquieu's tripartite division of powers into legislative, executive, and judiciary currently ceases to exist. It's the global corporations and banks that have the most power. That power comes from privatized money by which they gain a gigantic economic advantage over other market participants. Today's money is largely commoditized interest-bearing debt produced by banks out of thin air. Such money is used to create and control the centers of power, to enslave states, colonize nations, and to get rich at the harm of the other human beings. Such money is used to enslave normal working people, which we are. The value we produce is consumed by this constantly growing debt, and because of that, there is too little money in the real economy and too much of it on the financial markets. What we are experiencing right now as citizens and as people is a widespread financial discrimination. We are forced to have a bank account, to have a card, and to pay by credit card, and be that care in the interest generating machine. The money we keep on our accounts in a bank is not really ours, it's the debt of the bank towards us. Cash is slowly taken away from us. Our transactions need to be explained and are closely monitored. We are treated by default as potential criminals or terrorists at the airport when we travel, or at the bank when we move our money. Not only that, the economics, the science of finance and banking is producing false theories and dogmas. For example, the free market, which is in fact heavily regulated and exists only for large financial corporations. Or another one, dogma of natural law of cyclical economics and crisis, while these cycles are deliberately created and used by corporations and funds to take over fruits of the labor produced by people. This mechanism, sanctioned by science and debt money, deepen material and social inequalities. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. The spiral of debt is dramatically growing and includes states, nations, and individuals. Every goods and services carry accumulated interest of that money, which influences price growth and which is the real source of inflation. Such financial system is designed to collapse, and this is constantly happening in different parts of the world. Modern conflicts and wars are not fought between nations or states, but by transnational corporations against nations and states. The goal is to gain total control through economic manipulation and growing debt of states. This economic and financial invasion is based on so-called Washington Consensus. The Washington Consensus changed the structure of power, giving enormous privileges to financial corporations. Trilateral Commission, on the other hand, enabled enormous privileges, use of private capital as new army in another colonization of the world. This new, non-elected by people, power is the power of money created as interest-bearing debt. This corporate communism, disguised as capitalism, which it isn't, is colonizing and destroying our planet. It exploits it recklessly out of greed and for profit. It is the large corporations that are the creators of poverty and inequality. For example, it's them, not ordinary people, who are the biggest producers of garbage due to packaging and aging of the products. They are the propaganda of consumerism. They are destroying our civilization through debt money. And it's time to change that. Oh?
We as an institute are focusing on ideas that could change our economy and help people to regain their freedom. We have to shift the paradigm from being a servant to being a sovereign entity and protect our freedoms. For this, we have prepared the concept of social financial environment, which is eco-friendly financial environment for everybody. And also that's why we have prepared European Declaration of Freedom and Sovereignty as a statement for the world there is also Economic Constitution Act for Poland, which could serve as a blueprint for constitution acts for other countries. And here we are building awareness of people through our TV content on YouTube, through our articles on the website, and through our engagement in Free People movement. Our foundation takes active part in projects that aims to provide software implementation for our social financial platform, with our dual currency solution in the form of Huzar and Navicoin social currencies. More about that later. These documents mentioned earlier are available here on the table. You can take it right now, or you can find it on our website. Original idea of cash was to have a measurement of value and the mean of transaction. The anonymity of cash was also very important. Unfortunately, modern cash does not realize this idea anymore. There is no anonymity in each banknote that has an RFID chip that advertise a value and a serial number through NFC network. Such banknotes can be set on fire with a microwave beam. This is also perfectly possible for the central bank to make an overnight announcement and render all banknotes worthless because it's just a piece of paper. The good news is the return to the original idea is still possible, but in the new form. A social financial environment secured by the blockchain and anchored in the economical potential. It offers the opportunity to restore people's financial independence. Such an environment will be outside of control of state and financial institution. At the same time, it will provide transparent social control. Our solution is open source software implementation of social financial environment based on multifunctional and multi-currency distributed database in the form of blockchain. Such solution provides ultra-fast and secure financial transaction. It gives user enough anonymity, which make it a convenient cash replacement. Social currency are not debt-based, so the inflation is totally eliminated. The seigniorage, which will be regained for the community, seigniorage is the difference between the value of the money and the cost of its production. Today, seigniorage is stolen by the commercial bank. Part of the platform security is achieved through the distribution of the data between participating parties and also ability to work in a disconnected environment. Jacek?
Thank you. Okay, so Navi project is our software implementation currently in the making of social currencies platform, as well as an environment for creating and building services around them. We are building this as open source software, which allows for community control, and at the same time forms an invitation for co-creation of this platform to all of you. We are aiming at ease of use and performance. Transactions will be instant and making them will be easy as sending a text message. As part of the project, we are creating dual currency financial model consisting of an internal and external currency. Huzar is our internal currency, which is not convertible to fiat money, and Navicoin is our external investment crowdfunding currency, which is convertible to fiat and other cryptocurrencies. In such a model, any exchange of currencies is controlled by the community and by smart contract rules. So big fiat money capital cannot monopolize the market. The first product of the project is Navi Cash. It is a multi-blockchain and multifunctional wallet for cryptocurrencies. You can use it without any registration. Our crypto network is made up of network elements, and the wallet is an element of such a network. We store the whole data in wallets. So 500 wallets users make the network fully immune to data loss. We have two options: do nothing, lose our rights and become a slave of the system, or protect our freedom and help to create an alternative economy that others can enjoy with us. So please support our project. It is unique, important, full of potential. It can change the world. You can also become part of it and be that change. So please join our cause. Here are our contact details and our bank account number. I think that's it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys for this introduction of your approach to the problem of corporate monetary system and also your solutions, not only ideas but technical solutions. I'm gonna have some questions. If you're gonna have some questions, please write it down. We're gonna have a session of question and answers later. Now we'd like to move to Cameron McGregor. That is also an entrepreneur, also investor, that's running a practitioner from the business side, we can say, because you're running Cameron venture capital also, but you also, your organization Adactum is also working the fields that the guys were saying about advocating for free speech and basic freedoms. So could you give like a short introduction what you are doing, and then kind of your comment from the United States perspective, because it's the core of the system that we are living now. Thank you.
Sure, happy to do so. First, thank you for inviting me. It's always a privilege as an American to come to Europe for, if not many reasons, at least two. One is your food is much better than our food, I have to say. Secondly, your transportation systems and the trains are always lovely. So I really appreciate coming to Europe, because in the United States, you have to travel by car, and that's never fun as traffic gets worse. So I'm very grateful. And Vienna, for me, has always been sort of a home away from home. And what's always struck me when I come here is that when I go to Barcelona or I go to France or what have you, people always come up to me and speak in English because they assume I'm an American or I'm British. But in Vienna, they always come up to me and speak in German because I think they assume that I am Austrian. So I always take that as a compliment. I run a organization, I run a nonprofit, I run a for-profit, I run essentially a movement that's encased in a company called Ad Actum. And you can look up more about this organization at adactum.co. There are plenty of videos there and so forth. The inception of Ad Actum is actually somewhat of an interesting story, because it began really in 2019 traveling the world. And I did so in part because I was familiar with some degree of censorship happening. Part of that was because I was always consuming YouTube. I was on Twitter and various platforms like that. And what I recognized is that over time, some of the folks that I was following would disappear or their content was removed. And this, of course, posed a question: why was that the case? And as I traveled, and I was in Tokyo, Japan, I was in Hong Kong, China, I was in Bangkok, I've been all over Europe, you hear the same recurring theme. And that is that there is a war on free speech. And that war is being waged through financial discrimination, which is the subject that we're here to discuss today. The American story in this financial discrimination really is the story, I'm sad to say, because discrimination is, in a financial sense, has started really in the financial sector in the United States. And it's only escalated in recent years. And that's something I'm going to talk more about in just a moment. Really, I think the genesis of this story begins with the Patriot Act. And some of you may remember the Patriot Act some 20 years ago as a product of 9/11, which was a major turning point in the history of the United States. The Patriot Act gave unprecedented powers, legal and in many cases illegal, to surveil their own population. And importantly, the mechanism by which they engage in that surveillance is going to be a collusion between the corporate structure and the government. Now, the extent of this collusion was not fully known really until Eric Snowden, who now lives in Russia, disclosed to the world that the US government and specifically its intelligence agencies were leveraging major platforms around the world that we use every day. Google being the most prominent, but there are many, to surveil our information. This was quite a shock. I'm not sure it should have been a shock, but it certainly was a shock to the world. And the consequences for Snowden were severe, which is why he endeavored not to be a whistleblower and simply defect from the United States. So that should give you some sense of the magnitude of power that he was up against. Around the same time, Eric Schmidt, who was once the CEO of Google, said publicly that US government spying is a fact of life. It's the nature of society. It's the nature of the society that we live in today. And what's remarkable, something that I've discovered on my travels, is that most folks know it. Whether you're in Thailand or you're in Poland or you're in the United States, there's a growing awareness that this is in fact happening. And that also suggests that there might be a solution, which I'll get to at the end. The Patriot Act was the beginning. Then came the rise of somebody you guys have probably heard of named Donald Trump. In 2016, when Donald Trump became president, this was an earthquake event, particularly in Washington, D.C., New York City, and Los Angeles. You might say the epicenters of power in the United States, specifically financial and media power in the United States. It was so blindsiding, and I was in Washington, D.C. when this happened, that there were group therapy sessions on Capitol Hill, and there were all kinds of bizarre protests and activities. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. That's what essentially happened because it was such a shock to the system. And even folks that supported Donald Trump never believed that he had any chance to win, in part because he had no real support from mainstream media, right? The major corporations were aligned against him. So when it happened, this was a tectonic plate shifting. And the powers that be, the corporate media in particular, but also a lot of the financial corporations, were puzzled at how something like this could happen. And what they discovered is that on YouTube and on Twitter, there was something that they eventually coined the alternative influence network. This was an organic cottage industry of new media, of new thinkers, of new products, of new ideas, new, you might say, startups that were broadcasting the truth to the world, or their version of it, however you want to see it. And this alternative influence network was a threat to corporate power. It was a threat to the mainstream media. And to some degree, it was a threat to the financial sector. And I'll get to that more in just a moment. This was so shocking and such an existential threat to these corporate interests that they began to censor these content creators. They began to censor a lot of these companies that spiraled within this Trump mania. So alternative YouTube channels or alternative YouTube platforms, alternative social media platforms, and so forth. A lot of them were created because there was this hunger for new information and so forth. So in order to address this, these various corporate interests came up with a mechanism, and that was financial discrimination. It was to cut them off from banks. It was to restrict them from using applications that we use every day. And these applications run the gamut. It could be Uber as an example. It could be Amazon as an example. The list goes on. And essentially what they did is they started to squeeze a lot of these content creators. And so over time, many of these folks had to actually move. They had to leave the United States. They had to go to Southeast Asia, where they had to move to various parts of Europe. I mean, the extent to which you're bottled up, if your finances are bottled up, is quite striking. In addition to that, you started to see deplatforming and demonetization by the big data companies themselves. So in some cases, this is done directly. They will just remove your channel, or they'll cut you off from one of the payment networks. In some cases, it's done indirectly. So they will remove your search algorithm, or they will manipulate the algorithm in such a way that your content cannot get to market. All of these various tactics have since escalated, and they have brought us to the point where we are today, which is increasingly a fight of free speech in the financial sector itself. And that is centered in cryptocurrency. So at the same time as Donald Trump was elected in 2017, you really had the explosion of cryptocurrencies, at least the first iteration of them around the world, not just in the United States, but also in Asia. At that time, this was such a threat because it was a mechanism by which you could settle payments, you could store money, and you could move that money all over the world, bypassing these gatekeepers on Wall Street, or you could avoid unwanted attention from corporate interests, right? And remember that anytime you use a payment network, whether it's American Express or it's Visa or what have you, those mechanisms are also very sensitive to these financial elites as well. So if you were blacklisted by them, they can deny you access to a payment gateway, which essentially means you can't monetize, you can't survive, okay? So cryptocurrency, which came along at around the same time, was an existential threat to the financial system. Fast forward to March of 2023, so some number of months ago, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, a very powerful agency, has begun prosecuting a number of cryptocurrency exchanges to shut them down, so that you and I are forced into the mainstream payment networks and gateways and are forced to use a lot of these platforms that are openly and in many cases very publicly tracking our data and tracking everything that we do day to day. So the SEC has launched investigations into this sphere, and at the same time, the US government has implemented a program called FedNow. And FedNow is an effort, some believe, it's not a fact per se, it's more of a speculation, but FedNow is the beginning of a CBDC, a central bank digital currency. And what's interesting about these SEC lawsuits and the CBDC happening, or the beginnings of it happening more or less at the same time, is that a similar dynamic existed in China. So the Chinese banned Bitcoin, and you saw a massive decoupling of Chinese investment in dollars and a mass exodus out of China. And within a short time, that is when the Chinese government announced the CBDC as well. What does all of this mean? Well, CBDC is the root and branch tracking of everything that you do, because in order to do anything in your life, you have to transact. If you're going to get on a train, if you're going to purchase goods at a grocery store, if you're going to take a trip, all of that has to be transacted in some particular way. The CBDC allows a central authority, in this case a central bank, and whomever has outside influence at that central bank, to cut you off or monitor what you're doing or leverage whatever private transactions you're making against you. The severity of this, I think, it extends well beyond words. There's not much I can verbalize to scare you more than turning on your phone and all of a sudden all of your applications are shut down. And something like this has already been rolled out in China. So we're headed more or less down the same path. However, as I mentioned at the outset, there is a growing awareness that this creeping threat is beginning to spiral out of control. The awareness is in Poland, it's in France, it's in the United States, it's in various parts of Asia. And so now you're beginning to see opposition emerge. You're beginning to see organizations emerge like my Polish contemporaries here. At Actum's strategy, our view, our outlook is that we cannot fight this in any one particular way. We essentially need a whole of government approach. We need infrastructure companies. We need payment gateways. We need new social currencies. We need cryptocurrencies. We need as much initiative, innovation, and entrepreneurialism as possible to finance a parallel structure so that you and I can access our cash, so that we can transact without surveillance by central authorities and all of the downstream consequences that accrue from that. I am actually very optimistic that we're going to win this fight. And in part, the reason I'm so optimistic is because the financial system as it stands today is unsustainable. In fact, I believe it is self-destructing as we speak. Some of you may know that there is a banking crisis in the United States. That's true. And that banking crisis is spreading. And largely it's spreading because there's simply too much debt in the system. As they said in their presentation, that debt traps you in a system that coerces you to get a job, coerces you to live in a certain place or do certain things because you're under so much debt, you can't get out. Well, this system, in my assessment, is nearly at its end. And that's why you're beginning to see rumblings in the financial system. You're beginning to see banks fall apart. You're beginning to see insolvencies and bankruptcies. And you're also seeing economic challenges emerge. Something like 60% of all new mortgages in the United States are having trouble paying that mortgage. So these are households that recently contracted a debt to buy a home. They can't afford to finance the payments to stay in that house. And you can imagine that after decades and decades of accumulating debt just to stay afloat, American households, which are on paper the richest in the world, we are in trouble. We're sinking fast, which means we've got to get off the Titanic and we've got to get onto a lifeboat. And that is also why I believe that the US government has a fight on its hand with a lot of these cryptocurrency companies that are beginning to lawyer up. They're beginning to spend huge amounts of money fighting the US government on this matter. And they're not the only ones. Similar legal battles are being waged in Europe. And you're seeing the emergence of new media that's increasingly strong as well. Some of you are I'm certain, aware that Elon Musk recently acquired Twitter, which is a very big deal. It's a permutation in the media landscape in the United States. So you're beginning to see opposition gain momentum. Our view is that that momentum can only be sustained if we have an organizational wrapper around it. So we need to consolidate and coordinate all of the resistance, whether it's in Poland or it's in France or it's in the UK or it's in the United States. We all have to fight this together before it's too late. And I believe that the ability to do so today is greater than it's ever been. And part of the mechanism that we do that is venture capital. So we need to raise capital to finance organizations like theirs so that they can scale. Thank you for your attention to this. I hope this was informative, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Cameron. It was really informative. So we are shipping to the questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand and then say which organization or state you are representing. But now I'm gonna start maybe with first question. We have a few questions. We opened the topic that is really huge. So my first question is for the institute guys, but also Cameron, if you like to comment it. Is there any consensus between the freedom of social currency and the claim, like general claimed need of security of financial transaction that is controlled by banks and states? Do you see this? Could be a consensus. There could be because yes, this is my question. Maybe for Jacek and Michał.
So what we are trying to create is sort of alternative. So we're not trying to fight the system. We're not trying to get in collision with the law, with the current system that we have, but we would rather like to starve the system, not to fight them, because they live off our work and our services. So basically, that's the idea behind this, and we sort of like I said before, we want to create an alternative, and we want people to join us to just switch off to the right path and follow it with us. Yep.
There is also the idea of dual currency. Dual currency is one of our idea how to be with the system, but not to be corrupted by the system. I mean, we have the internal currency, which are not exchangeable to the fiat currencies. So the financial institution that has enormous amount of cash or fiat currency cannot corrupt this internal currency, because you can get this internal currency only by giving to the system services or products. But there is also another currency out, this external currency, that are exchangeable to the fiat currency, because some kind of cooperation is necessary. You cannot, in small society, to produce 100% of the product and services. But with combining these two kinds of currency, social currency, internal and external, you can achieve that goal to have everything you need in this society, or this small group of people, but without giving the ability to be corrupted by this fiat currency giant owners. I hope that it's answer to your question.
Okay, and Cameron, like I would like to follow up this question to the guys, because you said there is also the kind of general narrative in the mainstream media, of course, but also by the state officials, by also international organizations like OSCE and so on, that this new alternative currencies, like the cryptocurrencies, for instance, are used by criminals, for instance, to not legal acts. How do you defend this social or sovereign currency system or alternative services to these acquisitions?
Yeah, so this is a common criticism leveled by very corrupt powers against an innovation, a financial innovation. Most organized crime in the United States uses dollars. They don't use cryptocurrencies. And in fact, to some degree, you shouldn't use cryptocurrencies, because there is a decentralized blockchain that has a ledger of everything that you're doing. So, and we know that in some sense, this is true, because the US government has actually leveraged their access to blockchain technologies to track criminals, right? So this has happened over the last 12 to 24 months. I believe there was I think it was a Russian company that had actually engaged in some kind of financial crime against a Texas oil company. I forget the details, don't quote me. But because they were transacting in crypto, the US government was able to track it. So actually speaking, no, if you want to commit crimes, the best way to do so is probably in cash. It's not going to be in cryptocurrencies. That being said, what this is all about really is your property, right? And your property is not just your data. It's not just your money. It's your right to freely exercise decisions in a universe that is free to do and come and go as you choose. All right. Cryptocurrency, specifically something like Bitcoin, permits you to do that without a third party. The third party is the danger in all of this, right? So when you go to Starbucks, if you're in the United States, or McDonald's or something like that, when you take your credit card and you pay for something, next time you do this, go look at your statement, and you'll notice that they'll say pending on your accounts. The reason is because there's a middleman between the vendor and yourself, and that happens to be the credit card company or some other third party like that. That third party is the danger. Cryptocurrency bypasses that and allows that transaction to happen independently. So you don't need a financial institution to make that arbitrage occur, right? Right now in China, they have a system, some of you are probably familiar with it. It's called the social credit system. And the social credit system is sort of like a credit score in the West. But what it does is it rank orders people according to any metrics that the government decides. So your law-abiding character, or whether your neighbors think you're a good citizen. And this dictates your access to capital, okay? It dictates your financial empowerment or disempowerment, as the case may be. The reason why there is such an effort to undermine and impugn these new currencies is because they allow you to escape that system. They allow you to eliminate that third party, which, bear in mind, whether they have menacing intentions or not, they're making a profit from this. So in some sense, it's also an inefficiency. That third party is no longer necessary. And my sense is that the world is increasingly aware that this is the case. And so I think we're on the cusp of a generational shift in a new direction that's going to decouple from a lot of these third parties that are not just making a huge profit at our expense, but also have this backdoor capacity to turn our lives upside down.
Okay. Okay. First question, please. Please introduce yourself and click.
My name is Carlos Fite, and I'm a representative of the Catalan National Assembly. And we are Catalan independentists. We want to break away from Spain because we used to be an independent country. And what happens is we are targeted constantly by the state. For example, this is my cellular phone, and I bought this to block the signal when I don't want them to follow me. I don't use credit cards for my private things. I always use cash because when I bought the tickets here, or I bought my lunch or whatever, the train ticket to come here, I just put a 10 euro bill and I got the exchange and nobody knows who paid. So I value highly my privacy. I lived for 5 years in the US and in the late 80s and early 90s before the cellular phones. And I remember a big issue about if it was really legal to have the phone number of whoever was calling you on the screen of your telephone, because that could be an invasion of your privacy. Now with the cellular phones, that's, well. So what worries me about cryptocurrency is, does it guarantee really privacy? I mean, because it's data online. And that's why I use cash, because I don't like using a credit card because I don't want the bank to know what I spend my money with. So how do I know really that nobody knows if I use cryptocurrency?
First of all, I have a bad news for you. If you pay with euro, you are not anonymous anymore. In each euro banknote, you have RFID from Hitachi Corporation that gives information to the state, not only about the bill, I mean the amount of money, but also serial number. And this is connected with, in the big data, with the camera. So your picture plus with this transaction make perfect identification who pay for what. So this is bad news. Also bad news is that when people are thinking about blockchain, so cryptocurrency, they are mixing two things. First, that we have some technology, and the second, that there is idea of the cash we put into this technology. When you put corrupted idea of the cash as a debt money or as a money that can manipulate people, on the end you will receive the cryptocurrency which are corrupted and which are speculated on you and other market players. This is why we start our presentation with a new idea of cash. When you start with new idea of cash, which is controlled by society, by smart contract. So you put all information about what this cryptocurrency could and could not do as a public and unchangeable contract. And then you add this technology of blockchain to secure that nobody can change it from that moment of publication of that smart contract till the end of their days. This is something that you need to get used with. This is the new idea. And the other part of our solution is that you decide what kind of information about your history of transaction, you allow for other players to see. So you regain your privacy, so you can on this wallet decide that all this information are not available anymore. It's not make the security of this currency less, because you cannot forget last transaction. It's because on the blockchain, you probably know that the blockchain means that there is a chain of transaction. So because this chain is built of this small transaction, you cannot change the past transaction. This is why we know that your value of your wallet is exactly that amount. But in actual cryptocurrency, like Bitcoin, the history of all transaction is stored. We change it with our idea because we decide that we would like to put this anonymity control, or the control of the privacy, to the user. So you decide what kind of information will be seen for anybody from your wallet in our solution. It is answer to your question.
But still, how do you manage your money with a card? And is it good for small amounts, like €1 to €2 for a newspaper, or is it?
And there are two things you should. I was shocked with. One, when my friend goes to China and would like to buy 2 small things to eat. It costs like a fraction of $1, and the lady giving him the phone to make the electronic transaction. It was shocking, but when you think a little bit, it's something that are coming. This electronic form. The electronic form is not bad as is, but our institution, financial institution, try to stall this area of freedom by introducing CDBC to fulfill it, but they've not done it yet. So this is why we should go there to find our privacy in this area.
I'll just add 2 things. One is that you have to remember that cryptocurrency is a type of currency. So there are thousands of these things, all right? One of them is a cryptocurrency called Monero. Now, Monero is banned in certain countries, but it is considered the safest and most secure of all cryptocurrencies that I'm aware of, all right? It's used in the black market. There's no doubt criminal activity associated with it, but it's untraceable, which is why they use it. The reason I mention that is in the world that I see coming, you're going to have options. You won't be trapped. You won't be forced exclusively to use Bitcoin or what have you. Essentially, you'll use whatever the vendor accepts, right? And my sense is the vendor will probably accept any number of these things depending on its organic use. And that's a good thing, right? Because most people, they share your sentiments. They don't want their information shared. They want it to be private. Second point, cryptocurrency it's a software protocol essentially, which means it can be iterated. So you're going to see these blockchains evolve over time, and they will be responsive to what the public wants. So that means you will get more privacy protections and so forth, I suspect, over time, just as technology evolves over time. The final point that I would make is, and he just said it, I'm just going to rephrase it. You use cash because you're motivated to use cash. You want to conceal what you're trying to do. Most people, in fact, if I did a survey of people in this room and I said, who has cash? Probably very few do, because everything's done electronically, right? The next step is cryptocurrency, right? Why is it done electronically? Because it can be processed like that instantaneously. It's just new technology, right? Cryptocurrency does that. It just wipes out that middleman, right? So this is by no means going to happen. I'm not next year. This is a process that's ongoing. And the real question is, how much longer before the baby boomer generation, so they would be 65 and plus, much longer before they start to use it, because that's where the transition lies, right? The largest consumers of cryptocurrencies are my age. They're 40 and younger. Your generation, to a lesser extent, uses them. But if the banking crisis worsens, that may change, and that's what I see coming soon.
Just one more thing to add. Just one more thing to add to this about the nature of the money. So the nature of the money defines who really produces or emits the money, or controls the production or emission of the money itself. If this is a community and this is controlled by a community, this is all right. But if this is just a one instance that probably is corrupt, this is not really good. And if you put sort of that kind of money into the system, which generally gives you some privacy, you will end up getting out this also from this system, and then you will be sort of monitored in another way. So if the question was, is it safe to use cryptocurrencies? Probably not. Most of the time, Monero, like Cameron said, is one of the currencies that's really safe. We also would like to provide the similar anonymity of the currency, but we would like to we would want users to decide. So our currency is sort of not really a blockchain, but a directed acyclic graph. So each of the users have their own blockchain and can control their own blockchain. So if you would like to erase the history of your transactions, it would be totally possible in our net. But if you would like to keep it and provide information to somebody that you did it, it's also possible. Yeah.
I'm hearing basically two very different narratives. You guys want to develop this project.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I'm a colleague of his. I am neither an economist or a financier or a software engineer or developer. I have worked in ICT. I'm hearing two very different narratives here. One is a more secure money. We have to remember that money basically is a fiction that society has invented. We all put our trust in it. Okay, even on the dollar bill, it says "In God we trust" or something like that, I think. We simply believe that has the worth it may or may not have, and whoever who receives that also believes the same story. Okay, so from one side, there's what is money, either cash or electronic coins or whatever. If we believe in Bitcoin or in whatever cryptocurrency happens to be, we're going to believe that, and it's going to be worth whatever we consider it's worth. The problem I have is that there are, as I say, there are two narratives here. One is the development of this new currency, which is a cryptocurrency like Dog, like Bit, like so many others that have been involved in very questionable forms of dealing, not in the transactions, but in the investments. As people have been buying up because they believe that it's going to, how would you be controlling that? That's what the first question, okay? On the other side, we have this narrative, Mr. McGregor's narrative, which is we can't trust the authorities, okay, because they're all out to get us. And in fact, the authorities have been taken over by the major corps. Okay. Mr. McGregor mentioned that this all began with the Patriot Act. Now, I'm going to sound really liberal as far as Mr. McGregor's concerned. He's liberal. and I may sound sort of social democrat to the others. I think that it all began with deregulation of the financial sector. That's very clear. That's where the big banks started taking over, and that began with Reagan, with Thatcher in the UK, went on with Clinton. I mean, you know, it's neither Republican or Democrat or Thatcherites or whatever. And that is where the baby got thrown out with the water. Okay. Now that's another question, which is, I believe in regulation, and a good cryptocurrency must be very tightly regulated. Okay. Firstly, because it's software, and you say that it's open source. Fantastic, because then we can watch what it is. But it needs to be regulated. The question is who regulates. And my third question is, there's an inefficiency. You mentioned that there's inefficiency in the present system. There's always this third party in between. The problem is that crypto needs masses of energy to produce. You need masses of energy for transactions and for mining. So my question is, how do you deal with that energy consumption, which is a massive cost, okay, which is going to make the energy producers very rich, okay, and how do you deal with that side of the, in other words, who issues this? You're talking about the issuers of fiat is either the state, or in debt generation, it's the banks, okay? They're inventing money. But as I said from the beginning, money is invented anyway. Okay? It's a fictitious thing anyway. Who is going to be issuing this new social cryptocurrency?
Okay, so but please give brief, like concrete answers.
Very short,
because we are like out of time. If anybody have more questions, please raise your hand. If so, you have. If not, we're gonna have the answer for this question, and we're gonna have my last question to sum it up. Because we must,
okay, very shortly. First of all, our idea of social currency is based on the potential of the society that raise that currency. For example, you are a group of people with your identity, and if you want, on this platform which we prepare, you can raise your own currency based on your potential of your people. So everybody that are coming into the system need to, in the registration moment, to say what he can do as a services or product, and what price, and then he go into the system, receive this cryptocurrency, this social currency, but based on his potential that he's putting in. So there is a value when you start when you become part of this currency. We can discuss it. We can discuss it later. But this system are quite well. We think it's true how to do this to make this potential. This is first thing. The second question, Jacek will say about this security, what you ask, and this energy, because in this, when you create this smart contract, there is no special energy needed for creation. Jacek will tell a little bit about that. And one thing about the control, when you have the open source, it gives the ability to be reviewed by the people in a very efficient way, and the society that creating the smart contract for particular cryptocurrency, they decide about the features of this currency. Very shortly, thank you.
Okay, so let me just address the problem of energy. There's no really problem with our technology, because this was related with Bitcoin and their technology with the blockchain. In order to attach to a blockchain, you had to compute a very difficult function, so that costed energy. But in our case, there's no such thing. So anybody could update their own blockchain, and there's no energy cost related with it. So there's no such thing. So if you ask who defines the rules, the rules are defined by the emission or in the form of smart contract. So there are the rules, they are not changeable. So if somebody emits the token, this token has its own rules that define the usage, basically, and that's it. And people can use it, or they won't use it. I don't know, because of the rules. But in our system, we use two currencies. So one currency is internal currency, which is not really exchangeable. It is exchangeable to only one currency, which is investment currency, and the other currency is a transaction currency. So you cannot really have this sort of mode for the currency that you invest in. No, the transaction currency is just for the transaction, and for the investment you have a different currency. So it's not like you would accumulate a lot of transaction currency, and you would invest in a different form. And investment currency also carries the value of our whole platform, so it would grow if more users would come into it. So that's basically the basis for the value of our platform. So it's not really something defined by somebody. It's defined by the community who uses the whole platform. I don't know if I explained.
Cameron, you would like to comment it?
Yeah, I'll just be brief. So firstly, regarding the deregulation in the 80s, that's true. That did happen. I'm not sure that is, it's certainly in the background of what happened. This is censorship is a sliding scale, no question, and you could demarcate different periods of time. But the Patriot Act was, in my judgment, altogether different because of the collusion between government and corporate interests. The 1980s was a period of deregulation. It also extended into the 90s with Glass-Steagall being repealed and so forth. That created all kinds of corruption, but I think that was largely centered in the financial sector, and there are many consequences for that, for sure. The second point is, you mentioned that currency is a social construct, or it's effectively whatever the population believes it to be. That's half true, I would say. The mechanics or the characteristics of the underlying currency matter a great deal as well. I'll give you an example with gold, right? Most of the world believes that gold is money, but it's difficult to transact gold. You can't, go to your local market and pay for Starbucks in gold. Even if everybody wanted to do that, logistically, it's challenging, which is why there tends to be a fiat that's coupled to gold, right? So Bitcoin is a deflationary asset, and fiat is an inflationary asset. And my issue with fiat, which is probably shared by most, is that it decouples over time because it's printed human productivity from economic value. Those things break down, which is why you get an inflation of various costs and prices. So I think you're half right on that, but the characteristics of the underlying currency, that matters as well. The third point that I would make regarding energy and regulation, you're 100% right. All of those factors matter. But ultimately, it comes back to your first point. It just depends on what the public decides to do. That is going to be driven, and this is my central case, less by the attractive nature of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies and more by the existential financial crisis that we currently face. So in other words, if somehow the central bankers can stabilize the system, then cryptocurrency is probably not going to scale, and we'll probably be dealing with fiat for a lot longer. If, however, there is a persistence of this banking crisis, that will create the rationale, which I think will send huge numbers of folks into cryptocurrency and stimulate its adoption.
Okay, my last question to sum up, because we are in OSCE event, and we like OSCE always wants some recommendations, because we explained the ideas, the technical issues, and so on. So what you guys can recommend OSCE thus the states that are in OSCE should have some commitments regarding this to fight this financial discrimination. Maybe there should be some analyze by OSCE agendas this issue. Maybe there should be some I don't know, conferences or maybe some documents and that acknowledging these problems and this kind of. And for the states, should they be, the question, any regulations, and what kind of regulations they should be for maybe not the currencies, the crypto currencies, the alternative currencies, but how to use them to not, you know, to fight with this narrative that is for criminal use, for instance. So if you can, or for speculation, like for investment, like you said. So please, like shortly, and we're finishing.
So we have prepared two proposition of documents that are on the table, but shortly we generally say that private money should be banned, and generate the sort of generating money out of debt should be banned. That's the whole lot of problems that generate. So yeah, that's it.
I think that it's important, especially for that organization, to help us to educate a small voice like our voice, because it's small, especially now, and provide this voice also to the state, especially to give us a space for any kind of experiments, because too tight regulation, especially about money, that I called anti-terrorism, block any kind of alternatives for the banks that are generating debt money and giving us the debt spiral that we are all stuck in. So I think that these two things are quite good recommendation for organizations that are host us today to help us to grow, to have alternative. Thank you.
Yeah, the first point that I would make is that unfortunately free speech has become a very politicized issue, and in the nature of the world we live in, that I suppose is inevitable. But actually free speech, which today has become a more right-wing issue, was once a left-wing issue. It was championed particularly in the United States during the 1960s. So we should treat free speech, in my assessment, as expressed with this financial discrimination. We should treat it as a nonpartisan issue, and we should raise attention to people who are targeted for their political views. And that is a growing chorus of folks around the world in all kinds of countries. When your money can be attacked, that's your property, and it's your access to the modern world. That affects all of us. And the severity, the seriousness of that issue needs to be addressed by OSCE and other organizations like that, because the pendulum could just as easily swing back and target partisans who currently support it. So it is very dangerous, Orwellian Pandora's box, and we need to discuss these issues in public without condemning people for their views. So we understand that governments and corporations and financial institutions must have some regulation or some rule book by which their power is limited.
We have a question from the president of the National Institute of Strategic Studies, Wojciech.
Yeah. And then I have a question to you. This system just collapsed because of debt currency. It's a main problem in the world. But understand this, a few people, and interested the fewest. Tell me why.
Okay, I think it's an open question, and we're gonna leave you, the viewers and all the participants, with this question, because I think it was fascinating discussion, because it's a kind of a discussion for the future and what's happening now in the world. So hopefully we open this discussion for also international organizations like OSCE that should, I think, look into it personally, make an educational project, and maybe analyze this topic, and we can that we can move forward, because this financial discrimination is also a base of discrimination in different fields. Basic freedoms that is, of course, in the European Treaty of Human Rights, but basic constitutional freedoms. So I think it's important to talk about. So of course, we didn't use the whole. We only have 1 hour, but if you like to join us, I'm speaking to the participants to our follow-up event. We have a follow-up event in Vienna at 19 with a glass of wine. So you are all invited by Christian Zeitz from the Vienna Academy Bund, so the Vienna Academic Association, that is also a party of our event. So if you don't have any plans for evening, join us today at 19, and we can talk more about those crucial issues. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great conference. Thank you. Thank you.